For years, I carried a secret I never dared to share. Not with my family, not even with myself. I'm Natalie Carter, 34 years old, a director of strategic acquisitions at Synergy Tech, a major player in the tech world. I've climbed the corporate ladder, leading teams, shaping deals, and driving innovation in ways I never imagined as a kid. But in my family, I was always the invisible one, overshadowed by my older brother, Ethan, who's 36. To everyone, our parents, our relatives, even to me for a long time, Ethan was the tech genius, the prodigy who could do no wrong. His coding skills, his robotics trophies, his confident swagger, they defined our family's narrative. I was just his little sister, chasing dreams that seemed smaller in comparison. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I watched Ethan dazzle everyone with his brilliance. At 12, he built his first computer, while I was stringing friendship bracelets and dreaming of science fairs. Our parents, Thomas and Diane, both in their 60s now, looked at him like he was some kind of tech messiah. They didn't mean to dismiss me, but my achievements, like winning the school science fair at 11, felt like footnotes next to Ethan's headlines. "That's nice, Nat," he'd say, with a patronizing smile that cut deeper than I'd admit. It wasn't just his words. It was the way our family nodded along, as if my successes in business, in leadership, in understanding systems and people, were somehow less real, less valuable. The truth is, I learned to dim my light to keep the peace. Family dinners became Ethan's stage, where he'd lecture about blockchain and neural networks, dismissing my career as corporate fluff. I stayed silent, swallowing my pride, hiding promotions, awards, and the nights I spent learning to speak the language of tech. Not to code, but to bridge worlds. I built a career I was proud of, but I carried it like a secret, afraid of disrupting the fragile balance of our family. That is, until one Easter dinner in 2025, when everything I'd buried came rushing to the surface. Easter Sunday 2025, at our parents' suburban home in Portland, was supposed to be just another family gathering. Ham, scalloped potatoes, and Ethan holding court. But this time something was different. I arrived with my boyfriend, Daniel, 35, my quiet anchor in a family that rarely saw me. Ethan was already there, spinning tales of his startup, NextGen, and its so-called strategic exit. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, and declared, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech." The words were aimed at me, sharp and deliberate, like a blade he'd sharpened for years. I felt the familiar sting, the urge to shrink, to let his ego fill the room. But my stomach churned, not with anger, but with a truth I could no longer suppress. What Ethan didn't know, what no one in our family knew, was that my company, Synergy Tech, had just acquired his failing startup. NextGen was bleeding cash, 3 months from collapse, despite its brilliant technology. As director of acquisitions, I'd seen the numbers, advised the deal, and stepped back to avoid any conflict of interest. But I knew the truth. I'd helped save his company, his team, his reputation. And yet, there he sat, boasting as if he'd orchestrated it all, dismissing me as if I were still the little sister playing catch-up. Then came the moment that changed everything. Grandma Margaret, 80 years old, a former math professor with a razor-sharp mind, sipped her water and spoke. "Is that why Natalie's company bought yours?" The room froze. Ethan's fork hit his plate. Faces turned, eyes wide, as the truth hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. That moment wasn't just about revealing my role. It was about reclaiming my voice, my place, my worth. Have you ever held a truth so heavy it felt like it could break you? Have you stayed silent to keep the peace, only to realize that silence was costing you your identity? That Easter dinner, I learned that some truths demand to be spoken, no matter how much they shake the table. I'm sharing this story because I know I'm not alone. We've all had moments where our accomplishments, our struggles, our truths were overlooked. By family, by friends, by the people who should see us clearest. Maybe it was a sibling who always took the spotlight, a parent who didn't understand your path, or a friend who dismissed your dreams. Whatever it was, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. When did you feel unseen? And what happened when you finally spoke your truth? Your words might inspire someone else to step into their light. This journey isn't just about me or Ethan. It's about all of us who've dimmed ourselves to avoid conflict. If this resonates with you, hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about breaking old patterns, finding your voice, and building stronger connections through honesty. And if you want to keep up with my journey, follow me on X. I'd love to connect there. Thank you for listening, for seeing me, and for being part of this moment. Let's create a space where we can all be heard, where our truths matter, and where we lift each other up. Growing up in Portland, Oregon in the early 2000s, my world was shaped by two things: the misty rain that never seemed to stop and the towering shadow of my older brother, Ethan Carter. Ethan was 36 when this story reached its turning point, but back then, at 12 years old, he was already a tech prodigy in our family's eyes. I was 11, a year younger, full of dreams and ideas, but always trailing behind his brilliance. Ethan built his first computer from scratch, a clunky humming machine that seemed like magic to our parents, Thomas and Diane, now in their 60s. I remember the way their faces lit up when he explained circuits and code, words that sounded like a foreign language to them. To me too, if I'm honest. I was stringing friendship bracelets, sketching designs for science fair projects, and imagining a world where I could shine just as brightly. But in our house, Ethan was the sun, and I was a faint star, barely visible in his glow. I'll never forget the spring of my 6th grade year, when I won the school science fair with a project on solar energy. I'd spent weeks building a model that showed how sunlight could power a small motor. I was so proud, clutching that blue ribbon, running home to show my family. But when I laid it on the kitchen table, Ethan glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Nat, pretty basic though, compared to my programming competition win." His words landed like a stone in my chest. Basic. That was the first time I felt the sting of being less than, a feeling that would follow me for years. Our parents, Thomas, an accountant who struggled with a DVR, and Diane, a high school English teacher, didn't mean to play favorites. But they'd nod along with Ethan, their eyes wide with awe, asking him about his latest coding project while my ribbon sat untouched. "Your brother has a special gift," they'd say, their voices soft with pride. "Not everyone thinks like that." I'd smile, nod, and swallow the hurt, telling myself it didn't matter. High school didn't change the pattern, it deepened it. I threw myself into business classes, debate team, and student council, excelling in ways that felt meaningful to me. I loved understanding systems, how people work together, how ideas could be shaped into something tangible. But Ethan's achievements in robotics and coding competitions always stole the spotlight. By 18, he was accepted to MIT with a partial scholarship for computer science, a golden ticket that had our parents beaming. I chose a business program at the University of Washington, a top-tier school I was thrilled about. But when I shared the news at a family dinner, Ethan smirked and said, "Business, huh? I guess not everyone can handle the rigor of a real STEM program." His words were casual, almost playful, but they cut deep. I looked to our parents, hoping for a defense, but Thomas just said, "Ethan, be nice," before asking him about his latest coding project. Diane smiled weakly as if to say, "That's just how he is." I felt invisible, my ambitions reduced to a punchline. That dynamic followed us into our 20s. Ethan's internships at tech giants like Google became family lore, retold at every gathering. My achievements, graduating with honors, landing a marketing job at a small tech firm called DG Path, were met with polite nods, quickly overshadowed by Ethan's next big announcement. I worked harder than anyone at DG Path, not just in marketing but in understanding the tech we sold. I took night classes in programming not to become a coder but to speak the language of the engineers I worked with. By 28 I was marketing director, and by 30 I was recruited by Synergy Tech, a major player in enterprise software. Each step forward felt like a quiet victory, one I kept to myself. Ethan's dismissive tone never changed. At my graduation dinner, he said, "Marketing for a tech company? So, you make pretty brochures for products you don't understand." I bit back my anger, promising myself I'd prove him wrong, not for revenge but for me. Family gatherings became a battlefield I navigated with silence. Ethan would dominate conversations with jargon, blockchain, neural networks, AI, positioning himself as the only one who understood the modern world. "Don't worry if you don't get it," he'd say, looking at me. "It's pretty complex stuff." I'd nod, my jaw tight, while our parents beamed with pride. I learned to hide my promotions, my late nights, my growing expertise, because sharing them felt like inviting his mockery. But deep down, I knew I was building something real, something that mattered. I just didn't know how to make my family see it, or if they ever would. There's a memory from when I was 16 that still haunts me, a moment that crystallized the doubt Ethan planted in my heart. It was Christmas break, and our extended family was gathered at our house. Uncles, aunts, cousins, all crowded around the living room. I just won a regional debate competition, a victory I was proud of, one that took weeks of research and practice. I was excited to share it, thinking maybe this time they'd see me. But as I started to tell the story, Ethan cut in, talking about a coding project he'd finished for a national competition. The room turned to him, their eyes bright with interest. I stood there, my words fading, feeling smaller with every second. Later that night, I overheard him talking to our cousins by the fireplace. "Natalie's smart," he said, "but she'll never get tech. It's not her thing." His voice was so certain, so final, it felt like a verdict. I went to my room, closed the door, and cried. Not loud, sobbing tears, but quiet ones that burned. Was he right? Was I chasing something I'd never truly belonged to? That moment planted a seed of self-doubt that grew roots over the years. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I was fooling myself, thinking I could make it in a world that seemed to belong to people like Ethan. Even as I excelled in college, leading business clubs and earning internships, his words echoed. Every time I presented an idea in a meeting or pitched a strategy at DG Path, I'd hear his voice. "She'll never get tech." It wasn't just his dismissal, it was the way it made me question my own worth. At 20, during another family holiday, the doubt hit harder. I just landed my first internship at a tech startup, a small but exciting step. I wanted to tell everyone, to feel their pride. But Ethan was there, fresh from his Google internship, regaling the family with stories of Silicon Valley. I started to share my news, but he interrupted with a laugh. "An internship in marketing? That's cute. Nat, stick to what you're good at." The room chuckled, and I felt my face burn. I didn't speak up again that night. Instead, I retreated to my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever be enough. Not just for my family, but for myself. That doubt became a quiet companion, pushing me to work harder to prove I belonged, but also keeping me silent. I didn't want to risk his mockery again. So I built my career in the shadows, hiding my light to avoid his judgment, hoping one day I'd find the courage to let it shine. Through all those years of doubt and silence, one person saw me, really saw me. Grandma Margaret, 80 years old, a former mathematics professor who broke barriers in the 1970s when women in her field were rare. She was a surprise in our family, sharp and tech-savvy, wielding an iPad and smartphone with ease while our parents fumbled with basic apps. Grandma Margaret didn't just understand numbers. She understood people. She saw the way Ethan's shadow loomed over me, the way our family's admiration for him left me in the dark. And she refused to let me stay there. I was 19, home for Christmas break during my sophomore year of college, feeling particularly invisible after Ethan spent dinner recounting his Google internship. As the family dispersed, Grandma Margaret pulled me aside to her quiet corner of the living room. "They don't see it yet," she said, her voice steady but warm. "But you have something just as valuable as Ethan's technical mind, Natalie. You understand systems, not just circuits but people, markets, ideas. You see the big picture. That's your gift in technology. And it's just as important. Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the doubt that had been drowning me. She'd catch my eye at family dinners when Ethan launched into his lectures, offering a knowing wink that said, "Your time will come." Those winks were my anchor, a reminder that someone believed in me, even when I struggled to believe in myself. Grandma Margaret didn't just encourage me. She challenged me to embrace my strengths, to stop measuring myself against Ethan's yardstick. "Tech isn't just about code," she'd say over tea, her eyes bright with conviction. "It's about impact. And you, Natalie, you're built to make things happen." Her faith in me was a quiet rebellion against the family narrative, a spark that kept me going through years of silence. It was her voice I heard when I took on bigger roles at Synergy Tech, when I led teams and shaped deals. And it was her strength I drew on that Easter Sunday in 2025, when the truth I'd kept hidden for so long finally demanded to be spoken. By the time I was 25, I had carved out a place for myself in the tech world, though it wasn't the one my family imagined for me. I'm Natalie Carter, now 34, and back then I was just starting at Synergy Tech, a powerhouse in enterprise software, in their marketing department. I wasn't writing code or building circuits like my brother Ethan, who was 36 when this story unfolded. My strength lay elsewhere, in understanding how to bridge the gap between the technical minds creating products and the businesses that needed them. I saw systems not just of data or software but of people, markets, and ideas. That's what drew me to tech, not the allure of being a coder, but the challenge of making innovation accessible, impactful, and profitable. My first role at Synergy Tech was entry-level, crafting campaigns to explain complex software to corporate clients. I was good at it, really good. Within a year, I was promoted to marketing coordinator, leading small projects and presenting to executives. But I knew I needed to understand the tech itself, not just the messaging around it. So, at 26, I enrolled in night classes for basic programming, Python, JavaScript, the kind of stuff Ethan mastered in high school. I didn't want to be a developer. I wanted to speak their language, to sit in meetings with engineers and hold my own. Those late nights, hunched over a laptop in my tiny Portland apartment, were grueling. I'd code simple programs, debug errors until 2 a.m., and drag myself to work the next day. But every line of code I wrote felt like a step toward proving I belonged. Not to Ethan, not to my parents, but to myself. By 28, I was marketing director at Synergy Tech, overseeing a team of 8 and shaping global campaigns. I traveled to conferences in San Francisco, New York, London, pitching our software to Fortune 500 companies. I remember standing on a stage in Chicago at 29, presenting to a room of 200 executives, my voice steady, my slides crisp, knowing I'd earned their respect. That same year, I was named one of the company's rising stars, an award that came with a private dinner with our CEO. These were moments of pride, moments I should have shouted from the rooftops. But I didn't. I kept them locked away, hidden from my family, because I knew how Ethan would react. With a smirk, a quip, a way of making my victories feel small. At 30, I was recruited for a bigger role. Director of Strategic Acquisitions. It was a leap, one that put me in the C-suite's orbit, advising on multi-million-dollar deals to buy startups and integrate their tech into Synergy's ecosystem. I led a team of 15, blending business acumen with enough technical knowledge to evaluate cutting-edge innovations. I wasn't just marketing tech anymore. I was shaping its future. I'd sit in boardrooms, dissecting financials, patents, and product roadmaps, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions in revenue. I loved the work, the complexity, the stakes. But I carried it like a secret, a weight I bore alone. Why did I stay silent? Part of it was fear. Fear of Ethan's mockery. Fear of disrupting the family dynamic where he was the star and I was the supporting act. But part of it was me too. I'd internalized the idea that my contributions were less valid because they weren't hard tech. I'd hear Ethan's voice in my head saying, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech," and wonder if I was an imposter, despite the evidence of my success. So I worked harder, stayed later, pushed myself to be undeniable. By 34, I was a force at Synergy Tech, respected by colleagues, trusted by executives, and quietly proud of the empire I'd built. But in my family's eyes, I was still just Natalie, the business major who didn't get tech. That silence, that invisibility, was a choice I made, until the truth refused to stay buried. Family gatherings were where Ethan's dismissal of me hurt the most. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every summer barbecue at our parents' house in Portland, he'd take center stage, spinning tales of his tech conquests. Ethan, at 36, was the founder of NextGen, a startup he'd launched after his stints at Google and a few other Silicon Valley giants. To our family, Thomas and Diane, our aunts and uncles, our cousins, he was a visionary, a modern-day Edison. He'd lean back in his chair, tossing out terms like machine learning and decentralized networks, knowing most of the room couldn't follow. But they'd nod, impressed, hanging on his every word. And then he'd turn to me with that familiar smirk and say something like, "Don't worry, Nat, this stuff's too complex for marketing folks." The room would laugh, and I'd force a smile, my jaw tight, my heart sinking. It wasn't just the words, it was the pattern. At my 30th birthday dinner, when I mentioned my new role at Synergy Tech, Ethan cut in, "Director of Acquisitions? So, you're basically a glorified paper pusher for the real innovators." My parents, Thomas and Diane, chuckled nervously, as if it was just sibling teasing. But it wasn't. It was a deliberate attempt to diminish me, to keep me in the box he'd built for me years ago. I wanted to fire back, to tell them about the deals I'd closed, the teams I led, the respect I'd earned. But I didn't. I'd learned that speaking up only invited more of his mockery, more of his need to be the only one who mattered. Even when I tried to share small victories, Ethan would twist them. At a family reunion when I was 32, I mentioned a tech conference where I'd spoken on a panel about enterprise software. He raised an eyebrow and said, "A panel, huh? Probably just fluff about branding, not the real tech." Our Aunt Patricia nodded, as if he'd explained something profound. I felt my face burn, but I stayed silent, swallowing the urge to tell them I'd been invited because of my expertise, not my title. Those moments piled up, each one a reminder that my family saw me through Ethan's lens, as the little sister who couldn't keep up. What kept me going through those years was a quiet resolve. I'd see Grandma Margaret, 80, across the table, giving me one of her knowing winks. She'd lean over during a lull and whisper, "They'll see you one day, Natalie. Keep doing your work." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that someone saw my worth, even if Ethan didn't. But the weight of his dismissal was heavy. Every time he called my career corporate fluff, or implied I was out of my depth, it chipped away at my confidence. I'd go home after those dinners, replaying his words, wondering if I'd ever be enough. But I kept building, kept climbing, knowing that one day, the truth would speak louder than his boasts. In the fall of 2024, when I was 33, something shifted. Not in my family, but in my work. As Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech, I spent my days evaluating startups, deciding which ones had technology worth integrating into our platform. It was high-stakes work, requiring a blend of technical insight, financial analysis, and strategic vision. My team of 15 would pore over pitch decks, financials, and prototypes, narrowing down candidates for acquisition. One afternoon, my assistant, Jordan Lee, 30, dropped a new file on my desk. The cover page read, "NextGen Technologies." My heart stopped. NextGen was Ethan's startup, the one he'd been boasting about for years, the one he claimed was revolutionizing AI-driven analytics. I opened the file, my hands steady but my mind racing. The numbers told a story Ethan never shared with our family. NextGen's technology was impressive. Innovative algorithms, a sleek platform, real potential to disrupt the market. But the business was a mess. They were burning through cash at an alarming rate, with no clear path to profitability. Their latest funding round had fallen through, and they were 3 months from insolvency. Without a buyer, NextGen would collapse, taking Ethan's team, his reputation, and his dreams with it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of shock and something I didn't want to name. Vindication, maybe, or the faint stirrings of justice. As a professional, I knew what I had to do. Synergy Tech needed NextGen's tech. It aligned perfectly with our roadmap for AI integration. But as Ethan's sister, I was torn. I couldn't lead the negotiations myself. It would be a conflict of interest, given our relationship. So I recused myself, handing the deal to my deputy, Rebecca Sullivan, 45, a seasoned negotiator I trusted. I stayed in the background, advising on technical and strategic fit, ensuring the process was fair. But I couldn't shake the weight of what I knew. Ethan had built something brilliant, but he'd also built a house of cards, and I was one of the few who saw it crumbling. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not Grandma Margaret, not even my boyfriend, Daniel, 35. I carried the knowledge alone, wrestling with what it meant. For years, Ethan had dismissed my career, my expertise, my place in tech. Now, his company's survival depended on the very skills he'd mocked. My ability to evaluate, strategize, and execute. Part of me wanted to confront him, to lay the truth at his feet and watch his bravado falter. But another part of me felt a pang of sadness. Ethan wasn't just my rival. He was my brother, the boy I'd grown up idolizing, the one whose approval I'd once craved. I didn't want to see him fail, but I also couldn't ignore the irony. The corporate fluff he'd sneered at was about to save his life's work. The acquisition moved forward, finalized in early 2025, just months before that fateful Easter dinner. Synergy Tech bought NextGen for a fraction of its peak valuation, a deal that preserved Ethan's team and technology but exposed his financial missteps. He called it a strategic exit to our family, spinning it as a triumph, never mentioning the brink of bankruptcy I'd seen in those reports. I stayed silent, as always, letting him take the stage. But the truth was there, buried in the numbers, in the deal I'd helped shape. It was a truth I wasn't ready to share. Not yet. I told myself it was for the sake of peace, for the family, for Ethan's pride. But deep down, I knew I was waiting for the right moment, when the weight of my silence would finally break. The night Jordan confirmed NextGen's dire financials, I couldn't sleep. It was 1 a.m., and I sat in my Portland apartment, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the walls. The numbers were stark. Ethan's company was drowning, and I held a lifeline. As director of acquisitions, I'd advised a deal that would save his team, his tech, his legacy. But as his sister, I was torn apart. Vindication coursed through me. After years of his mockery, I was the one with the power, the one who saw the truth he'd hidden behind his boasts. Yet guilt followed close behind. Was I betraying him by knowing this? By playing a role in his company's rescue without his consent? Was I proving him right by staying silent, letting him believe I was still the little sister who couldn't handle tech? I thought about a moment 2 years earlier, at a tech conference in Seattle when I was 31. A senior executive from a rival company had pulled me aside after my presentation, saying, "You're a rare talent, Natalie. You bridge tech and business in a way most can't." I'd glowed with pride, but when I got home, I didn't tell my family. I knew Ethan would twist it, call it fluff, make it small. That memory stung as I stared at those financials. I'd hidden my light for so long, not just from him, but from myself. Why was I still protecting his ego, even now? The conflict wasn't just about Ethan, it was about me. I'd built a career I was proud of, but I'd done it in the shadows, afraid of his judgment, afraid of disrupting the family narrative. Part of me wanted him to know the truth, not to hurt him, but to be seen, to be acknowledged as his equal. Another part feared what that truth would do. Would it break our family? Would it make me the villain, the sister who sabotaged her brother's dream? I wrestled with those questions, my heart heavy with the weight of what I knew. In the end, I chose silence, not out of weakness, but out of hope. Hope that Ethan would find his own way, that our family could stay whole. But that choice came at a cost. Every time I saw him boast, every time he dismissed me, the truth burned hotter inside me. I wanted to save his company, to protect his team, but I also wanted him to see me, not as the little sister he'd always diminished, but as the woman who'd mastered her own corner of the tech world. That Easter dinner in 2025 would force me to confront that desire, to decide whether silence was still worth its price. Easter Sunday 2025 was supposed to be like every other family gathering at our parents' suburban home in Portland, Oregon. A table laden with honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, and the weight of unspoken truths. I'm Natalie Carter, 34, Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech, but to my family I was still just Natalie, the little sister of Ethan Carter, 36, the tech prodigy who'd always outshine me. As I walked through the front door, my boyfriend Daniel Brooks, 35, by my side, I braced myself for the familiar routine. Ethan would dominate the conversation. Our parents Thomas and Diane, both in their 60s, would beam with pride, and I'd stay quiet, swallowing the achievements I'd hidden for years to keep the peace. But that day, something felt different. A tension in my chest, a sense that the silence I'd chosen for so long was starting to crack. The dining room was warm, filled with the chatter of relatives. Aunt Patricia, 58, and Uncle Stephen, 60, were catching up with our cousin Kristen, 28. Uncle Mark, 64, was carving the ham, while Diane fussed over the table settings. Thomas poured wine, his face soft with the contentment of having everyone together. Grandma Margaret, 80, sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a mathematician solving a puzzle. She'd always been my quiet champion, the former math professor who saw my worth when no one else did. Her presence gave me a flicker of courage, though I didn't know how much I'd need it that night. Ethan arrived late, as usual, striding in with the confidence of someone who knew all eyes would turn to him. He wore a tailored blazer, his startup's logo pinned to the lapel, a subtle flex of his success. He hugged our parents, clapped Daniel on the back, and flashed me a smirk that said, "Ready for the show?" I nodded, my stomach tightening. We took our seats, the clink of glasses and laughter filling the air. Diane passed the rolls, Thomas said grace, and for a moment, it felt like any other Easter. Comfortable, predictable, safe. But I knew Ethan's performance was coming. The moment when he'd claim the spotlight and remind everyone, especially me, of his place at the top. Sure enough, as the plates were filled, Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, and launched into his latest triumph. He talked about NextGen, his AI analytics startup, with a kind of bravado that made you believe he'd single-handedly invented the future. "We just closed a strategic exit," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the table. "Not a bad deal for a company I built from the ground up. It's the kind of thing that changes the game, you know." Thomas nodded, his eyes wide with admiration. Diane smiled, saying, "That's our Ethan, always pushing boundaries." Aunt Patricia chimed in, asking about the tech, and Ethan obliged, tossing out terms like neural networks and predictive modeling that left half the room nodding blankly. I stayed quiet, poking at my potatoes, feeling the familiar urge to shrink. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, his steady presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. But Ethan wasn't done. He turned to me, his smirk sharpening, and said, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech, right, Nat? I mean, marketing's great for some people, but it's not exactly building the future." The words landed like a punch, deliberate and cruel. The table laughed, a nervous ripple that made my face burn. Thomas said, "Ethan, play nice." But his tone was light, as if it was just sibling banter. Diane glanced at me, her smile apologetic, but she didn't speak up. I felt the weight of every family dinner, every dismissal, every moment I'd let Ethan define me. My fork trembled in my hand, but I stayed silent, the truth I carried burning inside me. What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew except me and Grandma Margaret, was that his strategic exit was a lifeline I'd helped throw. Synergy Tech, my company, had acquired NextGen months earlier, saving it from bankruptcy. I'd seen the numbers, the cash burn, the failed funding rounds. I'd recused myself from negotiations to avoid a conflict of interest, but I'd advised the deal, ensuring his team and tech survived. And yet, here he was, boasting as if he'd orchestrated it all, dismissing me as if I were still the little sister chasing his shadow. The air felt thick, the room too small. I looked at Grandma Margaret, her eyes locked on mine, and saw something new. Not just encouragement, but expectation. She knew the truth, and she was waiting for me to claim it. The laughter from Ethan's jab lingered, a cruel echo that made my chest tighten. I stared at my plate, the scalloped potatoes blurring as I fought the urge to respond. 4 years I'd let moments like this pass, let Ethan's words carve away at my confidence, let my family's silence reinforce the narrative that I was less. But that Easter dinner, something shifted. The truth I'd buried, the truth about NextGen, about my role, about who I'd become, was too heavy to hold anymore. I felt Daniel's hand on mine, steady and warm, but it was Grandma Margaret's gaze that anchored me. She sat at the head of the table, 80 years old, her silver hair catching the light, her expression unreadable but piercing. She wasn't just watching, she was waiting. Ethan kept talking, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. He leaned forward, gesturing with his wine glass, describing NextGen's tech as if he'd invented AI itself. "It's not just about coding," he said, his voice dripping with authority. "It's about vision, about seeing what's next before anyone else. That's why we got acquired, because I built something no one else could." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder, saying, "That's my boy." Diane beamed, her pride so bright it hurt to look at. Aunt Patricia asked about the acquisition, and Ethan spun a tale of boardroom triumphs, of outsmarting investors, of walking away with a deal that cemented his legacy. Every word was a lie, not outright, but in the way it erased the truth, the way it erased me. I felt my pulse quicken, my silence straining against the weight of what I knew. Synergy Tech had bought NextGen because it was failing, bleeding cash, 3 months from collapse. I'd seen the financials, the red ink spilling across the spreadsheets. I'd advised the acquisition not to hurt Ethan, but to save his team, his technology, his reputation. I'd stepped back from negotiations, handed the deal to my deputy, Rebecca Sullivan, to keep things ethical. But I knew the real story, the one Ethan was rewriting to make himself the hero. His strategic exit was a rescue, and I was part of it. Yet here he was, dismissing my career, my expertise, my place in the very world he claimed to own. Then, in a moment that felt like the world slowing down, Grandma Margaret spoke. She'd been quiet most of the dinner, sipping her water, observing the room with those mathematicians' eyes that missed nothing. Her voice, steady and clear, cut through Ethan's monologue like a blade. "Is that why Natalie's company bought yours?" The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The table fell silent. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate, a small metallic sound that echoed in the stillness. Thomas froze, his wine glass halfway to his lips. Diane's smile faltered, her eyes darting between me and Ethan. Aunt Patricia gasped softly, while Uncle Stephen and Kristen exchanged confused glances. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened, a silent encouragement, but it was Grandma Margaret's face I looked at, calm, resolute, with a flicker of pride that said, "Now, Natalie, it's your turn." Ethan's face drained of color. He stared at Grandma Margaret, then at me, his smirk gone, replaced by something I'd never seen before, uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Grandma Margaret didn't flinch. She set her glass down, her movements deliberate, and said, "Synergy Tech acquired NextGen, didn't they? And Natalie, as director of acquisitions, had a hand in it. Isn't that right?" Her words were a spotlight, illuminating the truth I'd kept in the dark for months. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, the weight of their attention almost unbearable. 4 years, I'd been invisible, my achievements dismissed, my voice silenced. Now the truth was out, and there was no going back. Ethan pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's ridiculous," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying his confidence. He looked at me, his eyes searching for a denial, for a way to reclaim control. I met his gaze, my heart pounding, and said nothing. "Not yet." The silence stretched, heavy with questions no one dared ask. Thomas cleared his throat, saying, "Natalie, is this true?" Diane reached for my hand, her face a mix of confusion and guilt. I wanted to speak, to explain, to lay out the numbers and the ethics and the months of secrecy. But Ethan didn't give me the chance. He stood, his face flushed, and stormed out the back door, slamming it behind him. The sound reverberated, a signal that the family narrative we'd all clung to was about to shatter. As the back door slammed, the dining room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's absence left a void, but the truth Grandma Margaret had spoken filled it with a weight I wasn't ready for. I sat there, my fork still in my hand, feeling the eyes of my family. Thomas, Diane, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Stephen, Kristen, boring into me. Daniel's hand rested on mine, a quiet anchor, but my mind was elsewhere, racing back through years of silence, of wounds, of moments that led to this breaking point. Grandma Margaret's words weren't just a revelation about NextGen. They were a reckoning, a demand that I finally claim the space I'd surrendered for so long. I thought about a moment when I was 28, just after I'd been promoted to marketing director at Synergy Tech. I'd come home for Thanksgiving, proud of my new role, ready to share it with my family. But Ethan was there, fresh from a TEDx talk, regaling everyone with his vision for AI. I tried to mention my promotion, but he cut me off with a laugh. "Marketing director. So, you're selling buzzwords for people who actually build stuff." The room chuckled, and I felt my pride curdle into shame. I didn't speak up again that night. Instead, I drove back to my apartment, tears stinging my eyes, promising myself I'd never let him diminish me again. But I did. Over and over, I let his words define me, let his shadow keep me small. That memory burned as I sat at the Easter table, the truth now exposed, the chance to rewrite that story staring me in the face. Diane's voice broke the silence. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, and whispered, "Natalie, I'm so sorry we never saw you." Her words hit like a wave, cracking the dam I'd built around my emotions. For years, I'd craved their acknowledgement, their pride, their belief in me. But I'd hidden my achievements, thinking it was easier to stay quiet than to fight for their attention. Now, with the truth laid bare, I felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that I was finally seen, but fear of what it would cost. Would Ethan hate me? Would my family fracture under the weight of this moment? I looked at Diane, her eyes wet with guilt, and felt a pang of love mixed with resentment. They hadn't seen me because I hadn't let them, but they'd also chosen Ethan's light over mine. I thought back to another moment when I was 31 at a tech conference in Seattle. I'd given a keynote on enterprise software, and afterward, a senior executive from a rival company approached me. "You're a rare talent, Natalie," he said. "You bridge tech and business in a way most can't." I'd carried that praise like a secret, too afraid to share it with my family, knowing Ethan would twist it into something small. That fear had kept me silent about NextGen too. When I'd seen Ethan's company on our acquisition list, I'd chosen to step back, to advise from the shadows, to protect his pride and our family's harmony. But that choice had cost me too. Every time Ethan dismissed me, every time he boasted about his strategic exit, the truth grew heavier, a fire I couldn't contain. Grandma Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. You see the big picture, Natalie. That's your gift. She'd believed in me when I doubted myself, when Ethan's words made me feel like an imposter. Her faith had carried me through years of silence, through promotions and late nights and deals that changed industries. Now her words had set me free, but freedom came with a price. I felt the weight of every moment I'd stayed quiet, every chance I'd missed to claim my worth. The Easter table was my chance to change that, to step into the light I'd hidden for so long. But first I had to face Ethan, to confront the brother I'd loved, envied, and feared. I stood, my chair scraping softly, and followed him out the back door, my heart pounding with the certainty that nothing would be the same. I found Ethan on the back porch, the Portland rain falling in a soft drizzle, blurring the streetlights. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring into the dark, his shoulders tense. The bravado he'd worn at the table was gone, replaced by something raw, something I hadn't seen since we were kids: vulnerability. I stepped outside, the door creaking behind me, and he turned, his face a mix of anger and confusion. What the hell was that, Natalie? He said, his voice low but sharp. You let Grandma humiliate me in front of everyone. You knew about the acquisition and didn't tell me. His words were an accusation, but beneath them I heard hurt, the kind that comes from having your world upended. I took a breath, steadying myself. 4 years, I'd avoided this moment, afraid of what it would cost. But the truth was out, and there was no hiding anymore. I didn't want to humiliate you, Ethan, I said, my voice calm but firm. Synergy Tech bought NextGen because it was 3 months from bankruptcy. I saw the numbers, your cash burn, your failed funding round. I recused myself from negotiations to keep it ethical, but I advised the deal to save your team, your tech, your reputation. His eyes widened, then narrowed, as if he could argue with the facts. You're lying, he said, but his voice wavered. I had it under control. It was a strategic exit, not a bailout. I shook my head, the rain cool on my face. It was a rescue, Ethan, and I was part of it. He turned away, his hands clenching into fists. So what, you're the hero now? You think you're better than me because you pushed some papers around. The words stung, echoing years of his dismissal, but I didn't flinch. It's not about being better, I said. It's about being seen. For years you've called my work fluff, acted like I don't belong in tech. But I do. I've built a career, led teams, closed deals that matter. I'm not your little sister chasing your shadow anymore. My voice cracked, the weight of those words spilling out. Ethan looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or regret. He sank onto the porch steps, the rain soaking his blazer. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know it was that bad. I thought I was untouchable, that I had to be the genius everyone expected. I sat beside him, the distance between us narrowing. I get it, I said. You felt like you had to carry that weight. But you didn't have to push me down to do it. He nodded, his face tight with emotion. I was scared, Nat, scared of failing, of not being enough. I took it out on you, and I'm sorry. His apology hung in the air, fragile but real, the first crack in the wall we'd built between us. We sat in silence, the rain a soft rhythm around us. I thought about all the years we'd spent competing, measuring ourselves against each other, when we could have been allies. We're not kids anymore, I said. We don't have to tear each other down. Your tech, my strategy, we could be unstoppable together. He looked at me, a faint smile breaking through. You sound like Grandma Margaret, he said, and we both laughed, a small release of tension. Back inside, the dining room was quiet, the family waiting. Ethan stood, clearing his throat. "I owe you all an apology," he said, his voice steady. "I was wrong about Natalie. She's not just my little sister. She's a leader, a force in tech. Synergy saved NextGen and she made it happen. I'm proud of her." The words were simple, but they carried years of unspoken truth. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Thomas reached for my hand, and Grandma Margaret gave me a nod, her pride unmistakable. For the first time I felt seen not just by Ethan but by everyone. The Easter dinner that started with a boast ended with a bridge, one we'd rebuild together. After that Easter dinner in 2025, the air between Ethan and me felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like the rain had washed away years of unspoken resentment. I'm Natalie Carter, 34, Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech, and my brother Ethan, 36, was no longer just the tech prodigy who'd overshadowed me. He was my partner, someone I could finally see as an ally rather than a rival. That night on the porch, when he apologized and admitted his fear of failure, we didn't just reconcile. We laid the foundation for something new. We decided to work together, to combine his technical brilliance with my strategic vision, to build something neither of us could achieve alone. It started small, a few weeks after Easter, when Ethan called me. His voice was hesitant, a far cry from the swagger he'd worn at family dinners. "Nat," he said, "I've got an idea for a new project, but I need your help, not just with the tech, but with the business side. You in?" I was stunned, but I said yes without hesitation. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, laptops open, ideas flowing. Ethan sketched out a concept for an AI-driven platform to optimize supply chains, a niche Synergy Tech was eyeing for expansion. I saw the potential immediately, not just in the tech but in how we could position it, fund it, and scale it. For the first time we weren't competing. We were collaborating, each bringing something the other lacked. Over the next few months we became a team. I'd spend evenings at Ethan's apartment, poring over his code, not to write it but to understand its value proposition. He'd listen as I broke down market trends, customer needs, and investor priorities. His usual defensiveness replaced by genuine curiosity. We'd argue sometimes, Ethan's perfectionism clashing with my focus on deadlines, but it was productive, the kind of tension that sharpened our ideas. By August 2025, we had a pitch deck ready, and I arranged a meeting with Synergy Tech's Innovation Board. Standing side by side in the boardroom, Ethan explaining the algorithms, me outlining the go-to-market strategy, I felt a pride I'd never known. The board approved a pilot, giving us seed funding to develop a prototype. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental, not just for the project but for us. Working with Ethan changed how I saw him. He wasn't the untouchable genius I'd grown up idolizing and resenting. He was human, flawed, driven by the same insecurities I'd carried. He admitted one night, over beers at a Portland brewery, that he'd always felt pressure to be the family's star, to live up to our parents' awe. "I thought if I let you shine, it'd dim my light," he said, his voice quiet. I was wrong. Those words healed something in me, a wound I'd carried since childhood. I told him about my own fears, feeling like an imposter in tech, hiding my achievements to avoid his mockery. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because we'd both been so blind to each other's struggles. Our collaboration wasn't perfect. There were moments when old habits resurfaced. Ethan's tendency to dominate, my instinct to retreat. But we learned to call each other out, to listen, to compromise. Grandma Margaret, 80, became our unofficial mentor, joining us for coffee sometimes, her sharp mind cutting through our disagreements. "You're stronger together," she'd say, her eyes bright with pride. Her faith in us, the same faith that had carried me through years of doubt, kept us grounded. By late 2025, our prototype was live, testing with a major client. Early results were promising, and Synergy Tech was already talking about a full rollout. Ethan and I weren't just rebuilding our relationship. We were building something that could change the industry, proof that our strengths, so different, were unstoppable when combined. The shift in my relationship with Ethan rippled through our family, reshaping dynamics that had been set in stone for decades. After that Easter dinner, when Grandma Margaret revealed the truth about Synergy Tech's acquisition of NextGen, our parents, Thomas and Diane, both in their 60s, saw me in a new light. They'd always loved me, but their pride had been reserved for Ethan, the tech genius who dazzled them with jargon they barely understood. Now they realized I'd been a force in that same world, not just a bystander. Diane, especially, carried a quiet guilt. One afternoon, she called me to the house, her voice trembling as she apologized. "We didn't see you, Natalie," she said, tears in her eyes. "We didn't know how much you'd achieved." I hugged her, feeling a mix of forgiveness and relief. It wasn't just their fault. I'd hidden my light too, afraid of disrupting the family narrative. Thomas, always stoic, showed his change in action. He started asking about my work, not just Ethan's. His accountant's mind curious about acquisitions and strategy. At a family dinner in June 2025, he listened as I explained a recent deal, nodding thoughtfully, saying, "You've got a head for this, Nat." It was a small moment, but it meant the world. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Stephen, who'd once nodded blankly at Ethan's tech talk, now asked me about my role at Synergy Tech, their interest genuine. Cousin Kristen, 28, even texted me for career advice, saying, "I want to be like you, Nat." For the first time, I felt like a full part of the family, not just Ethan's shadow. Ethan's change was the most striking. He stopped dominating conversations, making space for others to share. At a family barbecue, he turned the spotlight on me, saying, "Nat's the one keeping Synergy Tech ahead of the curve. Ask her about her latest project." The table turned to me, and I spoke, my voice steady, no longer afraid of being dismissed. Diane's smile, Thomas's nod, Grandma Margaret's wink. They were all there, seeing me finally. The family wasn't perfect. Old habits lingered, and we had to work to keep the balance. But we were learning to celebrate each other, to see everyone's light, not just one star. That change, sparked by one Easter dinner, was a gift we'd never take for granted. By the summer of 2025, Ethan and I weren't just collaborators. We were mentors, giving back to the community that had shaped us. Inspired by Grandma Margaret's belief in us, we started a mentorship program through Synergy Tech, pairing young professionals with industry leaders. I focused on women in tech, sharing my story of building a career in a field that often felt like it belonged to others. Ethan mentored coders, teaching them not just algorithms but resilience, drawing on his own journey through NextGen's near collapse. We'd host workshops at a Portland community center, watching young faces light up as they realized they could belong in tech too. One mentee, Sarah, 22, told me, "You make me believe I can do this, even if I'm not a coder." Her words echoed my younger self, and I felt a purpose deeper than any boardroom deal. Our mentorship work brought us closer to Grandma Margaret, who joined us at events, her presence a quiet force. At 80, she was a legend. A math professor who'd broken barriers in the 1970s, now inspiring a new generation. She'd sit with ments, sharing stories of solving equations in a male-dominated field, her wit sharp as ever. One evening, she pulled me aside, her eyes warm. "You're doing what I always hoped, Natalie. Lifting others up, showing them their worth." Her words were a torch, one I'd carry forward. That summer, our family hosted a barbecue to celebrate the mentorship program's launch. The backyard of our parents' house was alive with laughter, the smell of grilled burgers, and the hum of connection. Thomas manned the grill, Diane passed out lemonade, and relatives mingled with ments and colleagues from Synergy Tech. Ethan and I stood together, watching the crowd, feeling the weight of what we'd built. Not just a project, but a community. Daniel, my boyfriend, 35, wrapped an arm around me, whispering, "You've changed the game, Nat." I smiled, knowing he'd been my rock through every step. Grandma Margaret took the microphone, her voice steady despite her age. "This," she said, gesturing to the crowd, "is what happens when you see each other's strengths, when you stop competing and start creating. Natalie and Ethan are proof of that." The crowd cheered, and Ethan squeezed my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of our journey. We shared stories of our ments, of Sarah's first pitch, of a coder named Jamal who'd landed his dream job. The barbecue wasn't just a celebration. It was a promise, a commitment to keep building, to keep lifting others. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the yard, I felt a peace I'd never known. This was family, not just by blood, but by choice, by shared purpose. Looking back, that Easter dinner in 2025 was more than a confrontation. It was a rebirth. 4 years I'd lived in Ethan's shadow, hiding my achievements to avoid his mockery, believing my worth was less because it didn't look like his. I'd let silence define me, not just with my family but with myself. But when Grandma Margaret spoke the truth about NextGen, she didn't just expose a secret. She gave me permission to claim my voice, my place, my light. That moment taught me that silence can protect, but it can also imprison. Speaking my truth, even when it shook the table, set me free. I learned that family isn't about perfection. It's about growth. Ethan and I weren't rivals anymore. We were partners, stronger for our differences. Our parents, Thomas and Diane, learned to see us both, their pride no longer reserved for one child. Grandma Margaret, my beacon, showed me that strength isn't just in what you achieve, but in who you lift up. Our mentorship program, our family's new dynamic, the barbecue filled with hope, they were all proof that change is possible, that wounds can heal when you face them with honesty. To anyone listening, I want you to know this. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's light. You don't have to dim yourself to keep the peace. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes, because it's the only way to be seen, to be whole. Ethan and I are still learning, still growing, but we're doing it together, with a family that finally sees us both. That's not revenge. It's redemption, a story I hope inspires you to write your own. Looking back on that Easter dinner in 2025, I see it as the moment my life changed. Not because I proved my brother Ethan wrong, but because I found my voice. I'm Natalie Carter, 34, and for years I lived in Ethan's shadow, hiding my achievements as Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech to avoid his mockery. His words, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech," cut deep, reinforcing a family narrative that I was less. But Grandma Margaret, 80, saw my worth, and her revelation about Synergy Tech's acquisition of Ethan's failing startup, NextGen, forced me to confront the truth I'd buried. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption, about claiming my place in a world I'd always belonged to. The journey taught me that silence can be a shield, but it can also be a cage. By staying quiet, I protected family harmony but dimmed my own light. Speaking up, even when it shook the table, set me free. Ethan and I rebuilt our relationship, becoming partners, not rivals, combining his technical brilliance with my strategic vision. Our family learned to see us both, not just one star. The mentorship program we started, inspired by Grandma Margaret, showed me that true strength lies in lifting others up. The biggest lesson: your worth isn't defined by someone else's success. You don't have to compete for light. There's enough for everyone. That Easter dinner wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a new one, written with honesty, courage, and love. A few months after that Easter, I found a letter tucked into my mailbox, written in Grandma Margaret's elegant handwriting. It was dated the day after the dinner, as if she knew the impact of her words would linger. "Dear Natalie," it began, "I've watched you grow from a girl who doubted her place to a woman who shapes the future. You've always had the gift of seeing the big picture, not just in tech, but in people, in systems, in life. Don't ever let anyone, even family, make you feel small. Your light is yours to shine, and it's brighter than you know." I read it through tears, her words a balm for wounds I'd carried since childhood. She ended with a challenge. "Keep building, keep lifting others, and never stop speaking your truth." The world needs you. That letter became my compass. It reminded me of the young girl who won a science fair ribbon, only to hear Ethan call it basic. It reminded me of the woman who led boardroom deals but hid them to keep the peace. And it reminded me of the mentor I'd become, guiding others like Sarah, 22, who saw herself in my story. Grandma Margaret's words inspired me to keep going, to share my journey not just with family, but with the world. They fueled our mentorship program, our family's new dynamic, and my resolve to never dim my light again. To anyone who's felt unseen, I share her message. Your worth is not a competition. You are enough just as you are. Let her words and my story be the spark that ignites your courage to shine. This story, my story, isn't just about one Easter dinner or one family's change. It's about you, whoever you are, wherever you're standing. If you've ever felt overshadowed, doubted, or silenced, know this. Your voice matters and your truth is powerful. Don't wait for someone else to see your worth. Claim it. Speak up even if your hands shake. Share your achievements even if they feel small. Mentor someone who needs to hear they belong. Start today, right now, by taking one step toward your light. Write that email, make that call, tell your story. The world is waiting for you. Ethan and I are still building, still learning, still lifting others through our mentorship program. Join us. Find a community, a cause, a purpose that lets you shine. And if you're inspired by this story, share it. Tell someone who needs to hear that they're enough. Together, we can rewrite the narratives that hold us back, creating a world where everyone's light is celebrated. So go out there, be bold, be you, and let your story begin.